Okay, so welcome everybody, and maybe one more minute. It's kind of late. I'm hoping for hello, Angelica and Paul. Thanks for coming and for saying hi. And if you're joining us just now, say hi in the chat. I can see the chat. So, BJ, hello, hi. My name is Cezary Gesikowski. I'm not an avatar, real human being, although these days it's really hard to tell. Some of the things, hi Lori and hi Barry, some of the things we're going to talk about today, the topic of the conversation is the imposter syndrome and the generative AI. How do you bring those two things together? But I'll talk to you about them, hi Barry, because I'm very passionate about both of these topics, and they're really related to sort of overarching passion, if you will. All right, so we have 18 people already. Let's get it started. One of the most interesting things that I think about is that the most profound technologies are those that disappear. They weave themselves into the fabric of everyday life until they are indistinguishable from it. That is a quote from Mark Weiser. Another quote that I wanted to open up with, maybe somebody will recognize it or Google it really quickly, is originality is nothing but judicious imitation. The most original writers borrowed one from another. The instructions we find in books is like fire. We fetch it from our neighbors, kindle it at home, communicate it to others, and it becomes the property of all. The original is in French, and it's by Voltaire. So interesting things about those two things that I just said, about technology and about imitation. When I was working at OECD in Paris, I was part of the Toastmasters, and I watched some of the members of Toastmasters prepare for OECD TEDx. It's like the smaller version of TED, and it's internal. It's not something that they broadcast. And I watched this very young, very competent, very bright woman, economist by trade. She was preparing to give a presentation, and she was so stressed and she was so nervous to do it. And this wasn't even going to be broadcasted outside of OECD. And I knew her. I knew how brilliant she was, but she doubted herself a lot. And only later I heard about the fact that 75% of women, especially in executive positions, they feel something called the imposter syndrome. And I was really interested in it because it's something that I felt for a very long time. My background is I'm a refugee child. I escaped communist dictatorship when I was a teenager. And ever since then, I have felt like a bit of an imposter. English is not my first language. First language is Polish. English is like a fourth language I acquired along the way. And whenever I speak it, I feel like an imposter. But I don't worry about it so much. And actually, I used to teach it. And I found teaching it was the best way to learn it along the way. So it was fascinating for me to think that there's so many different ways that people deal with this feeling of being an imposter. And then, of course, there is the concept that people don't talk about, the imposter syndrome, where people feel that they're imposters, but they don't really worry about it so much. And they say like, yeah, I know I'm an imposter. I'm going to embrace that, and I'm going to do something amazing with it and see how far I can fool everybody. Okay. So I stopped welcoming everyone who's saying hi on the chat, but I see that there's 29 people on Saturday evening. So I welcome you all here. We're talking about the imposter syndrome, and we're going to link it to generative AI. So speaking from that personal experience, I've worked with a lot of people that have sensed that. And I see it in people of all different ages, men and women, people of different backgrounds, cultural and different identities. And there's an interesting thing about that feeling of fear. Why do you feel that fear? It's because of the story that we tell ourselves about who we are. And for a long time, I told myself a story that, I'm nobody. I'm just a refugee child that came into this country and of Canada, where I live now. And it really kind of diminished some of the desires for greater things that I wanted to do, because safety was the most important thing for me for the longest time. So I wouldn't have enough courage to go beyond certain points. But I've overcame that by living yet in another place where I removed myself from all the different cultures. And I was an alien within an alien land. I lived in Japan for 5 years. So that's where I started to think about identity a lot. And identity is a narrative we structure. So that narrative is connected to language. And it's the stories that we tell ourselves that determine sort of how we interact with the world. And, the world is itself a story that we all buy into, and we believe in that narrative, or we disbelieve and we question it. So how do we fit into that larger narrative is about how do we tell our own story? And that's where the concept of identity and the clash of what other things think of me in terms of the society and how I fit into it, it became really an interesting sort of area to explore, coming from language, if you will. And language is an interesting thing, because now we're going to make a link to the generative AI. There's a lot of talk about AI, artificial intelligence, especially generative AI, because it creates something. That's the generation part. But I want to zoom out of it a little bit. And AI is nothing but just the latest manifestation of this larger thing that's technology. And I wrote my thesis in political science, but it was actually about more philosophy and theory, about Martin Heidegger and question concerning technology. And I wrote about, this was years before generative AI and AI was of interest. And I wrote about how the essence of technology affects human freedom. Where did all that come from? It came from reading Heidegger, really. And I'm not going to go into that because it's a very dense philosopher. I wrote about it for too long, and I wrote about it too much. I have a couple articles if you're interested to see how I make those linkages, and I wrote them on Medium, those articles. But the thing is, technology, okay, so AI is just a manifestation of technology. And technology, Heidegger looks at where that word comes from, the techne and the logos. And if you know anything about the logos, it's a Greek word for language, for knowledge, and for reason. Okay, logic comes from that word. But if you're familiar with the Christian Bible, it says first there was the Word, and that Word was good, and the Word became the body, etc., etc. There's a whole philosophy behind the power of word or words or language. And in fact, there's a very interesting thinker, Walter Ong, who was a Jesuit priest. I put it out there, but was also a thinker. He worked with Marshall McLuhan, actually, if you know that guy, from the theory of communications, the medium is the message guy, who said, Ong believed that language, and especially the written language, was a form of technology, ancient technology, much more ancient than anything else. And how he justified that is, it shapes our consciousness. And something happens when oral culture becomes a written culture and literal culture. So literacy develops and the word is written down. we conquer a certain dimension, a dimension of time. We only had in oral tradition the word present in the moment. In the traditions where the word was written down, it was something that was able to be passed along, and you could have conversations with dead people. Literally, this is what you're having when you're reading, and you're reading deeply. And this came to me when I was reading a Polish author, not very well known, I think, in outside of Poland. Although he lived and he wrote outside of Poland, he left just before the breakout of the Second World War to Argentina, Witold Gombrowicz. And he was shortlisted. He almost got the Nobel Prize for Literature in '69. Unfortunately, he died. And other than that, he was considered a very important writer. And I read a lot of his work. And he's fascinating. The way that he approaches thinking and language specifically. It's very difficult to translate him, and translators, now he's published in many different languages now, but he said something that is really interesting that stuck with me. And I will quote that to you. Spirit is born of the imitation of spirit, and a writer must pretend to be a writer in order finally to become a writer. Just as language shapes us, so too does technology. He did not say that last part, but I just want to say that there is a connection to that. We're all imposters. We're all creating our stories individually, and we try to fit it into the larger narrative. So the power of language again. Thank you, Angelica. Yeah, it can be a little bit confusing, and I apologize. I have a tendency to go off tangents, so this isn't as organized as I intended to be, because we're trying to connect the power of the word, the language, with what's happening in technology, but also with our own personal stories. So the power of language is where it comes from. Okay? We have created language, and now language is creating us. Language as technology, more ancient than anything else that we've created. Without it, none of what we call technology. And when we talk about technology, there are different ways of talking about it. It's not the manifestations of technology that you see, like a computer or some kind of a machine or an airplane. These are all different manifestations, but the essence of technology, as Heidegger said, is not technological at all. It's something completely different. I won't go into that so much. I'm going to focus on the language, and I'm going to focus on the aspect of identity and the stories that we tell ourselves. And my hope with all of this is that you understand that we all come together almost as imposters, because we're using words that were given to us. And almost all the thoughts that we are having, someone else has had before already. They were thought. And with whatever is your language, how many letters you have in your alphabet. And I've studied Japanese, for example, that has 3 different alphabets, right? So hiragana and katakana are the phonetic ones, and kanji are the Chinese characters, and there are thousands of them, for example. But with a limited number of these symbols, okay, basically, we can express the concept of infinity, which is pretty amazing. And it's almost an infinite combination of thoughts that we can put together. So it is about, language is about our relation to who we are, how we fit into the society. And that's where the imposter syndrome can be sort of overcome, because when you realize that we're all imposters in a sense, and that we're all making our presence as we present ourselves with language, it becomes really powerful way to deal with what you feel and how you interact with the society. Okay, so I can't read the chat as I'm speaking, because otherwise I lose my train of thought a little bit. And a few things I want to talk about. So, you know, we talk about ideas. That's what's the most interesting thing. But there's something in the literature itself that becomes really evident when you start reading deeper reading. I read Diaries of Gombrowicz, which is like 1,000 pages. There's several volumes. I usually have them around here, but not at the moment. Yeah, I just put them somewhere else. But 1,000 pages, okay? 3 times, very deep reading, trying to understand things. Something happens, okay? And Gombrowicz said this that struck me as well. I am less interested in the thought itself, which I know from somewhere else. Yeah, we can find thoughts in many different places. Than in the desperate struggle between the thinker and the thought. Just think about that. Like the struggle, the impostor syndrome is about the complex relationship between perception and reality. That struggle is in all of us. And when we express that struggle becomes our narrative. And it becomes what's really interesting about us. I can have a lot of different ideas. I can quote you a lot of different thinkers. We can have a pub conversation in which, often happens around universities. And you might have seen it in some movies where they try to up each other about, who I know. And I think it was in Good Will Hunting. There's that kind of conversation at the pub. But do you have any original thoughts of your own? That's a very difficult question, okay? But what you do have is an expression of who you believe you are. And that's where the language comes into it. Now let's link it to generative AI. What is AI and how does it link? So technology is about, according to Heidegger, okay, it's about revealing the world. He sees it completely differently than most people, and this is he wrote that in the 50s, so the technology wasn't as advanced as it is now. And he had an interesting analogy for what technology is. And that technology is a way of revealing. Revealing what? Aletheia, or the truth. Well, this is what we do with language. That's what language exists for. If you think about what's important to us and what we want to talk about, it's linguistically, we want to understand each other, but we want to get at the truth. What is the truth? We get lost in trying to explain ourselves and worrying about who we are and how we are seen by others. And we're lost in these conversations sometimes. But with technology such as generative AI, and I've been using it a lot and trying it out and doing a lot of different experiments, and I write about these and I started blogging about that recently and linking these things together. So hopefully some of you find that interesting. But I just want to say, we're coming up on the time where I want to give you a chance to ask some questions and talk about it. What happens is we become what we behold, said Marshall McLuhan. We shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us. How is ChatGPT and generative AI that's creating images, different form of language, creating music, another form of language? It's creating a lot of things that we consume as individuals, as humans, right? It's bringing all that technologically, all the knowledge that we have, and releasing it back to us. How do we interact with that? It can be very confusing if you're a creator and you start using these tools. It can affect you. You start asking yourself even more questions and doubting yourself, and can be a little bit dangerous. But this is what Heidegger says as well, and he is quoting Holderlin, who's a German poet, where the danger lies. That's where is the greatest saving power. And that's also an approach to generative AI technology that we all can take. What I'm going to do right now is I look at the time, as I went a little bit longer talking about these things. I had more things I wanted to tell you, but I'll stop over here and see if you guys have any questions or if you want to probe some ideas. I see that Claudia wrote a little bit earlier. You're really interesting, and just first speaker I saw smiling. Tired and not able to keep receiving your wisdom. Okay, everybody's tired, but it's the most beautiful place to be when you're tired. Okay, you're most receptive to magic. Okay. Is there a way to ask questions in the chat? If you want to pop some questions in the chat, okay. I would be willing to go a little bit deeper in something maybe that struck a note with you. You want to talk a little bit more about the imposter syndrome. You want to talk about how language is technology. You want to talk about how Heidegger sees technology. I don't want to go so much into AI itself. I'm not an AI expert. I'm an AI enthusiast. I research AI from a philosophical perspective, but I welcome your questions now. I think they will appear in chat, okay, or Q&A. I don't know where that goes. I'm new to this platform, so something is happening. Okay, how to not doubt yourself and your abilities, especially if using AI. Okay, yeah, okay, words having power. Thanks, Angelica. So, yeah, I doubt myself all the time. We should doubt ourselves. The thing is, we need to become more comfortable with discomfort and with uncertainty. You might have heard this concept called VUCA. It's called the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment. This is where we are in the modern world, okay? The VUCA world. And it's really difficult to be in this world because so many things are changing so fast. I work in public service and I work in transformation and bringing change. I've been doing it for professionally for over 10 years now, and we're constantly changing. We're constantly trying to improve, to serve public. And it's very difficult. We doubt ourselves. We need to doubt ourselves. And in fact, we need to doubt the technology that is giving us all these wonderful answers. It is also an imposter. You've heard about the hallucinations. They're actually more delusional, these models, okay? You are a language model as a human being. You have a collection of formulas that you use and expressions that you use. And some people say like, yeah, you always say that, yeah. When I've been writing for over 30 years and publishing, I've realized using AI that I use formulaic ways of expressing myself, because I would put in articles and into the model and say, hey, please tell me what you're noticing are patterns of language that I use, okay? And I would have conversations with the model about a piece that I wrote or a long time ago. Compare it to this, compare to that, feed few on that same topic. Because it can find patterns that I can't myself see. A very good editor could do that as well if you have a very good relationship. But because I moved around the world so much and work with so many different publications, it's difficult to have that consistency, okay? I wish I had Gertrude Stein, who was a mentor to Hemingway, telling me how I should write. I've always wanted that, but maybe ChatGPT can help me out with that. And I've been working with these models before ChatGPT, okay? I've worked in the playground with GPT-3, 2, and I was a researcher before that. I ran some experiments with different language models in Hugging Face as well. So anyway, any more questions, any more comments, I welcome those. I see there is loving your thoughts. Okay, Bella, I'm really happy to hear that. Okay, that's great. Flattery is awesome, especially on Saturday nights. Have a drink. Okay, cheers. I hope you're drinking something stronger than lemonade. Any other thoughts? No? Okay, so we have 5 minutes left, and I'm looking at. Okay, quite a few people still hanging around. That's great. I want to try to make it worth your while, okay? And oh yeah, there's a question here in Q&A. I would like to comment on subject you are touching. In my humble opinion, I think that the international background is actually the biggest advantage many people do not realize. Okay, that's very good. It actually is a great gift to have this kind of possibility to profit from this heritage. Absolutely, yeah. I do not understand why so many people of those backgrounds do feel in terms of imposter syndrome. On the contrary, you should be proud of it, shouldn't you? Absolutely. You know, I have to tell you something. I really love it, and I really love to hear some comedians that are kind of take the license of being able to make fun of their community. I thought about that I was invited to do stand-up comedy. I didn't take the chance. I don't want to be a comedian. I want people to smile, but I don't want to just make people laugh. But I think it's amazing. Like, I can't remember the names, but there's some great comedians from India, uh, of Asian heritage, for example. I mean, in North America, I know that there's like, for example, the American Black community has a lot of strong comedians, but historically they played for different audiences, right? But I think it's great that they embrace it and they have humor and they probe it deeply and they're not afraid and they are proud of it, you know? And I think it's amazing. When I lived abroad, I met a lot of people from a lot of places. I was always very curious about their culture. And I found that when people come to North America, especially, it's a little bit less in Europe. I lived in Europe and it was a little bit different. France and Paris being a very particular place, but OECD, where I worked, was really international. There was a lot of people from different countries and highly educated and above my grade of understanding in terms of economy, for example, and statistics. And I loved having conversations with them. I think it's great to embrace these backgrounds that we have and bring them out and make them shine. And I hope you check out Witold Gombrowicz. And maybe I can put that in a name in the chat. Am I able to do that? Yeah. I really would like you to check it out. His diary is in English, and there's a lot of minutia, but there are some pieces, if you're truly interested in writing, that you find inspirational no matter where you're from. So thank you for that comment. A couple more minutes. Are there any more questions? I would like to, okay, how do you feel about these issues of the training of AI systems on other people's work? Yeah, this is very controversial. Okay, so I've been publishing a lot, and I also am a photographer, so I've published a lot of pictures for iStock, which was later bought by one of the big stock agencies. I pulled all my pictures out at that time. I was really disappointed. I'm so glad that I did it. Models were not trained on a lot of those pictures, but I've written a lot. And I actually, a couple of years ago, I deleted a lot of my writing. I don't know why. I just had this feeling. But I've published in many other places, and not even under my name. Okay, I've worked in newspapers, and I published articles that didn't even have my name on it. So it's difficult, okay, to hear this, that, hey, someone scraped the internet and now they've trained these models. But to tell you the truth, I kind of not only expected, but kind of hope that it will happen. It's because we want to bring the collective intelligence together. And the problem is that people are angry because they were not told. And people feel like they're not being compensated. But as a writer myself, as a creator myself, I don't create just for money. I create for the sake of creation. And it's like that torch that Voltaire was talking about. It's like the fire you pass to somebody else as a writer. It's a publishing business and writing business side and making money. It's something different, okay? I'm talking about, like, I want to share my ideas with people. That I don't mind. Just go and run with it. They're not mine. I just am a custodian of them, and I manipulate them. The Legos don't belong to me. They always belong to the next kid that's going to play with them. That'll be my answer to that. Any more questions? I'm going to flip the chat. Okay, so questions. I think we're out of time. So thank you very much. I really appreciate you showing up this late and staying up. Follow me on Medium if you would like to get more of this. I'm a little bit different in writing, but thanks for coming. And I think we're out of time now. So all the best, and see you around. Thanks for spending the time on your Saturday evening with me. Cheers.